watching the Forefront Church video podcast. And wherever you're at viewing online, we just want to say thank you and welcome. And one of the ways that we can help connect with you is we want to hear from you and where you're at and how we can help. And so head over to forefrontchurch.info after the message and click the Connect tab. It's a great way for us to help you along your spiritual journey as you connect with God and learn about Jesus. And so sit back, relax. We hope that you're challenged and encouraged from today's message. The last week of this series, and that trailer gives me almost a slight panic attack every time it plays. I've heard that from multiple people, and so that is the last time that you'll have to hear that. And everybody said, amen. Yeah. I think it has driven home the point of this series, though, that we're a little bit overloaded. About 2001, I took my first trip to Mexico, leading a bunch of students down there to build homes for people who are in need. And it was high school students, not middle school students, because middle school, and you're not taking them to another country because middle school. And so we took a bunch of high school kids down there, and they had all the supplies, they had raised the funds, we had all the meetings, and we got down there and they had the foundation laid, and you break them up into groups and you size up. There are some power tools on site just to like cut things, and you size up like which kids should be nowhere near there, which kids shouldn't even have a hammer, you're on paint crew, which kids you're just like, you don't have a whole lot of dexterity, go play with the children, and then you'll give some kids some hammers and put them on the framing crew. And so we're dividing up about 30 kids, and realized there's a couple of them like, should I give them a hammer? And I was like, this is dicey, but I gave this kid a hammer, and I was like, let's see how this goes. And if not, we're in the middle of Mexico, and his parents won't recognize that we buried him there, and it'll be fine. So we give him a hammer, and he starts hammering away, and I watch, and he's just like, tap, 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 tap. I'm like, we're going to be building this house for 14 years if this is the case. And so it's like, hey man, can I show you how to do this? And there's an art form to being able to hammer something. And so he's like, all right. And I was like, just get it set, and then bang. And he's like, all right. And then he does it. He's like, yeah. And he's a bigger guy, so I knew he could like do it. I knew he could handle it. And so he's going away and he's going to town, but then he gets a little cocky. And he's like, all of a sudden he'll just like place it and then bam, and like hit him in. And some of them are going tilted and everything else. And I'm realizing, man, you just gotta slow down. Got to take your time with this. And he would get like a lot of them. He was getting a place where he'd be like halfway in, and he'd be like, he'd kind of look around, and he would hammer it to the side and nail it into the wood. And I'm like, no. It's like, hey man, what you doing? He's like, I'm building the frame. I was like, no, you're not. You're hammering nails into wood, and not well, I might add. And he's like, well, you worry about where you're at, and I'll worry about it. And I'm like, I'm gonna sacrifice a child here in Sonata, Mexico. And it was like, yeah, all right, I love Jesus. And so I was like, hey, you can't do it that way. I showed you how to do it. You got to do it that way. And he looks at me and he's like, you take care of that. What I'm doing is good enough. And I was like, it's one of the phrases that I have early on. I used it with my dad, who in the military for years, and that phrase wasn't going to fly as a kid. And learned early on that was a no-go. And so I looked at him, I was like, hey, if Jesus were here, like right here. He's like, but he's not here. I was like, play along, bro. Say if Jesus were here, and then there's the whole theological, but whatever. And I was like, say you were standing here right now, we were building this house for him, would you do it differently? He's like, yeah. I said, hey, remember that meeting right before we left where we said, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me? I was like, you need to do better. We've been called to more. We have not been called to just good enough. And that's why we started this series, Overloaded. Because I think for many of us, we feel like good enough in life and in faith is good enough. And I want to encourage you this morning that good enough is not good enough for God. If you're new to faith and where I'm glad you're here, but God has called us to more. And I think if you're new to faith or you've watched believers for any length of time, you would probably contend, man, I wish that believers would live like they mean it, that they would not only talk the talk, but they would walk the walk. And I want to encourage you this morning that you did not wake up today to be mediocre. Jesus came for you and I to live an extraordinary life. It's why we started this series Overloaded, because I think for many of us, we're kind of phoning it in. We're kind of just doing the minimal because we just feel the weight. And so in week one, and where today is like accessory overload. In week one, we decided we need to address this thing called work because we don't have very good boundaries. And the way that we described it is that you and I have the same amount of time, all of us do. We kind of likened it to this tape measure where we say I have my work, and then I have my friendships, and well, I want to have other activities, and well, maybe I'm going to have a relationship, maybe I won't, so I'm going to add a relationship to that, and then maybe that relationship turns into marriage, and you're like, oh, there's more, and then we got to buy a house, and then maybe we're going to have kids, and we're like, oh, we saw somebody else's kids, we're not giving, oh no, we're going to have kids, and then before too long, it collapses. And under that weight, doing it on our own, we just can't do it. And so this is the unfortunate part, and we talked about this in week one, is people go, all right, God, I'm going to connect to you, but God, you and me can do it. We're going to balance out all of this stuff, and we're stretched so thin that nothing is really getting our attention, whether it's work, the tasks, and these things. And so one of the things that I encouraged you with in week one was that God has called us to live a life that has boundaries, which is why for us as a family, when Friday nights come and people ask us, hey, would you like to go out Friday night? And we go, that's family night. We go out together and we spend the night hanging out as a family. Well, you could do it. And we're like, no, that's going to be our boundary. And we're going to have margin because we want to honor God and not be about tasks, but be about people. And we're not going to feel overloaded in what we do because we want to do the things that matter. But it's hard to do when our minds go a little awry, which is why in week two, we really dug down deep into our thought process and the fact that you and I can be overloaded in our minds and we can believe lies that have crept in there because people have told us things and circumstances have happened. And so we end up believing things that just aren't true. And we go, well, how do we combat that? And we say, that we need to make a change because there's a connection with God and the things that we focus on, but the lie that we believe is that we can balance it. And we focus on the situation. We go, I can get this, and before too long, it falls. We go, I'm going to try this again, and I'm going to work it out. I'm going to do the situation. Before too long, it starts to fall again. And as we look to what Jesus has in store for us, he goes, you know what? It's not about balance, because that's a lie. We can't balance things, but we can change our perspective and focus. So don't focus on the problem at hand. I want you to be connected, but I want you to look above and not focus our attention on earthly things, but on God and things above. And things begin to get more clear. And even though the situation is happening, there's a lot less chaos and it's not buckling because we're trusting Him to move in this. But we go, oh, no, I got it. And we start to focus down and it begins to fall again. He said, all right, well, I want to change that. I want to change my focus. And how do I do that? Because I'm drawing boundaries in work, but what about my thoughts? And so we clearly said that there needs to come a time where we break down the walls and we declare demo day, where we harness our inner Chip and Joe Gaines and we throw ourselves through walls and knock stuff out and say, those thoughts do not need to be there. But for many of us, we just go, you know what? I've kind of liked some of those things, and even though they're bad thoughts and they're hurtful and they're dragging me down, instead of declaring demo day on them, we pull up a chair and we sit down with some coffee and we entertain those thoughts for days and weeks and months and years, and we wonder why our thoughts are overloaded. So you know what? It's time to declare war on those and kick those to the curb and be free from those things. Which led us into week 3. And Dan did a phenomenal job is we addressed busyness. We go, okay, I'm going to address the boundaries in work and tasks, and then I'm going to address my mental thought. But we kind of wear this busyness as a badge of honor, and we go, 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 go. And he busted out the good old emergency button that says, and you freak out and you lose your mind and you go, God, I need you. And that's when usually people show up at places like this. They go, God, life was going fine then, and I was stretched really thin, but I was okay and doing everything, but and I need you. God goes, I love you, but I think that there's a better way. See, I think you and I need some rest, and we need to press pause and look at our schedules and look at the things going around and not be overloaded and take some time too, like many people have over the course of this holiday weekend, to just simply rest. Talked about press and pause, and some of the best things you could do is maybe you just need to take a nap, which I had my watch going off for the last 3 days as I sat in a recliner watching movies with my daughters going, your rings normally are further along than this. Would you like to close them? And I'd be like, dismiss. Because I just wanted to take time to pause with them and not worry about the things and the movement. But sometimes we can feel overloaded. And so we're going to draw those boundaries and just really reclaim those thoughts and get ourselves back in order. But then we took a turn in week 4. It wasn't the things that we kind of needed to get rid of and get a handle on. It was maybe some of the things that are internal, that all of this overloaded stuff is stacked up, and now we feel so overloaded that we aren't addressing any of it, and we've become lazy. We looked at the instance of where my daughter left the toilet paper roll with just enough for me to be angry. And calling, and then leaving it, and I took care of it. Then she was sitting in that same moment, go, Daddy, I need some whatever. And we had a life lesson about we need to look out for the other person. And sometimes when we see a task, we need to sit down and do it. And then later on, we talked about how the bathroom was stopped up and she needs some help. And I explained to her there's a plunger right there. And she's like, I don't know how to use it. And so I showed her, said, here's how you use it. And we got it out, and this one's clean still. And we got the plunger out. And she said, that's really easy. And I said, all right, I'm going to hand this off. And now you can do this. Now that you can do this on your own. You see, all of these pieces come together. This is why we do the series the way that we do and teaching moments we do, because they build on one another to give us a full picture of what it means to live a life that moves freely and lightly in God. Which leads us to today. If we're learning about our boundaries and we're learning about our thoughts and we're learning about the busy schedule and things we need to put off, and we also need to be able to muster up enough courage to tackle the things that are there, does God believe that good enough for us is good enough? Or does he call us to more? And if you're a believer this morning, I would contend that God has called you to more. And if you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn over to Acts chapter 10. It's in the New Testament of the Bible. If you don't have a Bible, you can pick it up at the Get Connected table, or if you're more digitally inclined, and for you guys online, forefrontchurch.info has a notes tab that has everything that we're looking at today. And over in Acts chapter 10, kind of give you a snapshot of what is happening here. We catch up with two individuals. Catch up with this guy named Cornelius and this guy named Simon Peter. See, Cornelius is a Gentile and Simon Peter is a Jew. And during that time, they should not talk. They do not mingle. It would not be okay. It would be much like the sentiment of between Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia. There's some things there that just it doesn't get along well. And well, these two individuals living in the culture that they are, it was actually during that time illegal for them to even be together in the same place, talking, speaking, hanging out. And while Cornelius, both of them are searching after and following God, separately in their own towns and cultures. And Cornelius is following God, and he's been praying, and he has this dream. And in this dream, God tells him, you need to call this guy, Simon Peter, and get him to come here. You've been praying, and I have some things in store for you. Now, he had a task. He could either honor God, or he could go, you know what? I've been pretty good. Like, I care for people, and I'm generous, and I care for the people that are in my household, because he was a higher up guy and had a lot of people working for him. He's like, I care for all these people. I don't need to invite this guy in. It's illegal. And if I do invite him in, we're from different cultures, and that's not okay. And so I'm fine. But he doesn't decide that. He doesn't decide that good enough is good enough. He wants to live in more. And so he sends some of his servants to go and get this guy, Simon Peter. And simultaneously, Simon Peter's had this vision that's difficult to kind of understand. But basically, being a Jew, he was not allowed to eat certain meats that had been killed. And God said, listen, what I have called clean is clean. You can eat whatever. And he's like, I don't really understand this dream. And upon having that dream, these two guys show up and go, hey, we're Gentiles, and our boss said that you should come and be around, and we kind of know that's illegal, but you should come anyway because we feel like he feels like God's called you to come here. And so he goes, oh, and there's that light bulb moment. I feel like God's calling me too. And he had a choice. Should I just stay because he had heard from Jesus, walked and talked, seen miracles, was there on the day the church, the movement started earlier in the book of Acts in chapter 2. He was that guy. He had been before courts and they had wanted to, throw him in jail. And he's like, I'm not going to stop talking about Jesus. He had seen it all. He could be the one to say, you know what? I'm good enough. I don't need to go and entertain this, what could be a problem. But he went. And so he shows up under the roof of this gentleman, Cornelius, and Cornelius says, we had this dream. He's like, listen, I had this vision, and I think God has big things in store. I want to impart to you. I've walked and talked with Jesus. I've seen this amazing thing. I just want to share with you the knowledge that I have about the movement of God. And he starts sharing with him in Acts 10, starting in verse 39. He shares with them, he said, we are witnesses of everything he did in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They killed him by hanging him on a cross, but God raised him from the dead on the third day and caused him to be seen. The writer continues on. He was not seen by all the people, but by the witnesses whom God had already chosen, by us who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to people and testify that he is the one whom God appointed as judge of the living and the dead. And all the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sin through his name. And as he shared this, in this moment, God's Spirit came and fell upon the entire household. Everyone was moving and experiencing God's love and God's grace, and it was this supernatural event that took place that neither man in the beginning stages, they could have said, you know what, good enough is good enough, and I'm trying to follow God, and so it's fine. But they said, you know what, God is calling me to more. And as they answered God's call to more, as they answer God's call to not just simply good enough, but to excellence, that I'm going to follow you. When you say go, I will go, that they watch this miraculous thing take place. And in the sweeping movement of God's Spirit moving, they all made the decision to get baptized and follow God. And we watch this take place and we go, wow, that's amazing. That someone would decide to answer God's call and that someone else would decide to answer God's call. And what happens when two people decide, I want to follow God? Well, miraculous things take place. But unfortunately, in the throes of today's American Christianity, as people come to church on average 1.5 times a month, average across the country, which I don't know how you can go half a time, but it averages out that way, that people read their Bibles, if they claim faith, one time a month on average. I wonder if God is calling us to more, but our attitude might not be there yet. And I want to encourage you that I don't always have the best attitude, but I know what God wants for me. I love this quote by Thomas Aquinas. He says, the test of the artist does not lie in the will with which he goes to work. Because let's be real, there are days where you're not feeling it, but in the excellence of the work he produces. See, there are days for me, I don't know about you, for those of you guys who are in a relationship or you're married, there are days where I wake up where I'm not like, whoa, I can't wait to serve my wife. And she's sitting in the room right now, so I probably need to be careful. But if we're being honest, there are days where I don't wake up and I'm like, what can I do to serve her? Whatever. There's some days where I wake up and I go, I just want to go back to bed. There's days where I wake up and my kids are like, Daddy, let's go play, let's go do whatever. In more words in 10 minute span than I'll speak all day. And I go, oh dear Jesus, what have we done? I don't know if I want to be around you people. if I'm being honest. But I do it. There was no more perfect example of this than recently we were at a craft show, and my wife, who loves craft shows, and if you like craft shows, I'll pray for you, we're walking through there, and she sees this sign. It's a porch sign, and it says Merry Christmas on it. And she says, I really like that. How much is that? And so I walk over, and I check the price, and I see that it's $50. So I turn around and go, we're not getting that. And she's like, well, I like it. It's kind of neat. I was like, it's 2 fence posts and paint, and they're charging $50 for that. That's going to be a no. And so I don't know how your dynamic works. We have a really good relationship, but somebody has to kind of make that call. And so when we're at a craft show and somebody's asking $50 for $2 fence posts, that's going to be a no. It's a hard pass. And so, but as I said it, I did not think through. You ever said something and you just haven't thought it through? And I said, that's just 2 fence posts and some paint. I can make that. And she goes, oh, okay. And I never done that before. And so, and I figured that's easy. Like it's $2 fence posts, like a few dollars in paint would be good. And I was wrong. I should have paid the $50. Because I started getting into this project and I bought the fence posts and I went online, I started researching, and I'm hanging out with all the other Pinterest people and trying to figure out like, how am I going to do this? And I'm looking on, and so I mock it up in Photoshop. I show her, she's like, I like that color. I don't say it out loud, but I'm like, that's going to take more coats of paint to do. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And she's not pushing me to do any of this stuff, but I go into mode like, I'll complete something for you. And it ends up turning into a project, what I thought would take me like an hour. Took me 4 days of work because I'd paint a coat, and she was like, well, I want it to look, like, and in no time during this was she like being or whatever. My wife's amazing, but she's like, look like it's like aged, look like the one was there. And so I made this thing for her for our porch. By the way, I'm not making one for you, so don't hit me up. Because I didn't say I do to you. Somebody else probably said that to you. You need to tell them to make you one. And if nobody said I do to you, then find a neighbor. And so I did, but I was like, paint a coat of white. Got to let that dry. Then got to use this crackle stuff, which I was like, I don't know that about. I'm going to paint some crackle stuff. And I was like, but it's not crackling. I was like, because you got to put another coat on it. And then I use a projector to shine the things. And then I'm up to like 2 a.m. painting letters. I'm like, those look great, except they look brand new. And now I got to sand them down and do whatever. And I was like, I'm done. And then I'm like, no, I'm not done. It needs to be finished. And so I found a piece of metal that was like a stake that goes in the ground, and cut it and sand it down. Then put paint on it and dirt, and then and nailed it in. And I was like, and she thought it was amazing. So I'm like, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, because she thinks it's amazing. But what I found in just a simple project, I realized that when I stood and said I do, I said, I will do everything for you with excellence. And so if that took me 12 weeks, I was going to get it done, because I wanted to make sure that what I gave her was a sign of my excellence to her. Or, as Jessica Guidobo says, every job is a portrait of the person who did it. Autograph your work with excellence. You see, God calls us to more, and I wonder if we've kind of phoned it in when it comes to our faith. Well, I can be a little bit rough around the edges because that's who I am. No, God calls you to more. God's made you a new creation. If you follow God, if you claim faith, if you call yourself a Christian, which is a Christ follower, your life is different. And it's not called to just kind of be meh or good enough or fine. It's called to be something greater by His power. You see, if we just settle for goodness, that overloaded goodness leads to lack of greatness. And my prayer is that you and I would choose excellence over enough. That we wouldn't just hammer in a half nail on the house of Jesus, and in our actions, in our relationships, and in our friendships, and in our job, and in all these things. That we've seen the tools of balance and getting a hold of the thoughts and not being busy and not being lazy. We go, God, I want to give you more because you've called me to excellence. That's why the writer in Galatians 2 shares with us, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. We're different. If you claim Jesus, you are different. And He's called you and I to more. Not to a mediocre life, but one that is exceptional. You see, I see a lot of people, and I've done this in my own life. This is why when we talk about these overloaded things, I struggle with that because I did not walk into this with a good attitude. I was like, I can do that. Okay. And then I went, oh. Then 4 days later, blood, sweat, tears, and there's spots on this thing that we probably won't talk about where paint spilled and it was bad and it was a scene. But I wanted to do something great. And the way that I do that for my wife, the way that I do that for my kids, I also want to do that in my faith. And that's what God calls you and I to if we claim Jesus, is to be counter-cultural and to not just go with the flow. You see, only dead fish go with the flow. You're alive. You're different. Don't imitate, I wrote this down when I was going over this stuff. Don't imitate that which has no life. Don't imitate dead things. Don't model your life after that. Look for the pace setters. Look for, if you're married, I want you to look for a couple that's doing it stronger and better and sit down and invite them out to coffee. If you're single, I want you to see, because this is something that the church has done an awful job with. If you're single, I don't want you to look at that as some goal to one day get married. God made you amazing just the way you are. And if you get married, awesome. If you stay single, awesome. But find another single person that doesn't look at singleness as a disease, but looks at it as something that God gifted them, and find out how they're doing it well. You have kids, find somebody who's crushing it at handling kids and dealing with kids and parenting kids and raising up kids, and invite them over for dinner and go, how are you doing this? Because I don't know how. Look for the pace setters. Because you know what? Only dead fish go with the flow. You're alive, and so live like you're alive because people are counting on you. And as they count on you, they're asking something of you, whether they articulate it out loud or not. What they're asking you to do is to go the extra mile. And unfortunately, it's never crowded there. That's why when we watch the evening news and the very last story, after all of our stories that we hear from whatever news organization that agrees with everything that we think about, the last story on the news is, let's talk about something happy. And we all go, oh, and we all repost it on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. That's why those stories that come up and we go, oh, that's amazing. You know why we find them so amazing? Because we rarely hear about them. Why do we rarely hear about them? Because going the extra mile for individuals is not the norm. And God has called us to greatness, an extraordinary life, a life that doesn't just settle for good enough, but moves in excellence. And we go, you know what? I want to do everything I can to move in excellence, and I want to strive to help other people. And so you know what? We're going to go the extra mile. It is not crowded, but I would encourage you, don't compare yourselves to other people. Jesus is your only measurement. Don't look at it what I call communal holiness, where you look at somebody else who follows Jesus and they kind of mess up a little bit and you go, oh, well, I'm good because look at them. Or you go, you watch the evening news and you see somebody shot somebody else and you go, well, God, I'm good because I didn't do that. And you don't ever strive to get better and stronger, more faithful, more loving, more gracious, more kind. You just go, I'm fine. The only measurement you and I have is the measurement of Jesus, and his life was excellent. And so we go, God, I want to strive to be like him. Christian, Christ-like. And I love the way this perspective puts it in by Henry Beecher. He says, we should not judge people by their peak of excellence, but by the distance they have traveled from the point where they started. You know, sometimes we see people and we go, oh, I can't believe they just in their life, like it doesn't seem like they've moved. And then I'm able to have a conversation with somebody that doesn't feel like they move very far. Then I begin to unpack for them where I saw when they walked through the doors and where they are now. And they go, oh. I just go, man, God has done such a great work in your life. Why are you not seeing it? Well, most of the time we don't see it because we're still so living in the past that we can't see the journey that God has taken us on. And as we look at individuals and you say, you know what, man, you've done really well. One of the best things that you and I can do is not simply be thankful, which is going around everywhere right now, but be thankful by being an encourager. One of the best things I could tell you to do, quit being sarcastic and be kind. Quit being rude, be kind. Be loving and encouraging to other people. You know what? It will surprise them. Why? Because going the extra mile, it's not very crowded. Because what happens is everyone thinks I'm just good. I'm okay. I'm not like and fill in the blank. But overloaded goodness leads to lack of greatness. And my prayer is that we'll choose excellence over enough. And I want to share with you a story about our family. But I want to preface this by saying I'm not sharing this story to somehow garner attention to our family. I want to share this story because this matters. As a young man growing up in the local church, I watched a lot of people dial it in, just kind of phone it in. And they felt like it was good enough. Almost every one of my mentors fell to acts of sexual misconduct, and it was bad. Everybody who mentored me. And I watched this happen, and I go, man, I want to be different in my life, and I'm not perfect, all right? Don't go home, the pastor thinks he's a man. No, I know that there are days where I phone it in. But my hope and prayer is that our family, my wife, our daughters, that we will live not in good enough, but in excellence. And I was traveling a couple months ago, and I got a phone call from a friend. It's a young man who was in my youth group when I was a student pastor. And he was in my kind of small group of guys, and his wife was in my wife's small group of girls. And love the kid, amazing. There's those kids who you just go, man, they're going to grow up and do amazing things. You see those young people and all that. And this message that was left on there, and we'll call him Chris for lack of better noting. And Chris leaves me a message and says, hey, I need you to call me. There's some heavy stuff going on in our lives. And so I call him, got out of a session we were at, and I said, hey man, how are you? I said, hey, I found out that this stuff had happened in our marriage, and I'm devastated. I don't know what to do. He's like, it's not all her. I've fallen short too, but I just don't know what to do. And I'm like, hey man, I love you. Let me call my wife, whatever. And so I call my wife, explain to her the situation. She's devastated, and we start texting back and forth. There's got to be something that we could do. And they kind of had landed on this thing where whoever had the kids would stay at the house, and whoever wasn't having the kids for that time period would have to go elsewhere. And so for almost the last couple months, we've had him staying at our house Sunday night through Wednesday night. And there were all kinds of hurdles we had to jump through, like saying no to things that people invite us to and whatnot. But we knew we needed to do this. Even if we didn't have a guest room, it's like, man, we'll open up our couch. Because why? When we walk past this every time we enter in here, we're people helping people to what? Find and follow Jesus. And this person had found Jesus, but they needed help following him. And so this person, this Chris, and so we're like, hey, we're going to open up our home to you. And we didn't know what that would look like. There was some apprehension, but we knew we knew that excellence needed to be over enough. And excellence meant we care for people. And so we did. And I'll tell you, the first couple weeks of him being there, it was saddening to watch him, and just down. His marriage is going crazy. Yeah, kids involved, the whole bit, and then I texted him on my way back home from church one night. It was like October 23rd, 24th. I was like, hey man, when you get there, I got a project for you. I need some help. He's like, what? I was like, need you to help me get Christmas stuff down from the attic. He's like, it's October 20 something. And I was like, yeah. I was like, I really love my wife. And so we're going to get stuff down. And all you guys who are blaming me for your wives decorating early, you're better men for it. And so shut up. Anyway, so and so I was like, hey man, and we're getting the stuff down, and we're joking. He's like, you have all your boxes numbered, you're really OCD. I was like, quit judging me. And so we're getting them down, and makes a passing comment. And he goes, man, I didn't realize that last Christmas was my last Christmas the way it ever was. And I was glad he was down there moving boxes in, and I was in the attic, because I'm losing it. And we get all the boxes down, and 2 days later, and I still haven't really seen him smile. And he comes home, and we're, long story short, we were playing walking tag because we had played regular tag, and that ended up badly. But walking tag is intense. Can't really explain it all. I don't have enough time. But But it still ended in injuries. And he comes home, he's like, what are y'all doing? I was like, playing walking tag. And it's me and the girls, because Carrie's like, I got none of it. I'm going upstairs. And she was the only smart one. And so he takes off his dress shirt. He's just got his undershirt and his khakis, and he's running around. All the girls are chasing after Mr. Chris, and they're like, whatever. And they're chasing him and doing all these things. And for the first time in it, I see him kind of tumble over and roll in the den. I see him smiling. And again, it hit me, and I'm like, and I suck it up because I don't want the girls to see me cry in front of Mr. Chris. And so I'll be like, what's wrong? And I can't explain to them what's going on. And a couple days later, we're sitting at the bus stop, and we just opened up our house because we wanted to move an excellence over enough, but I didn't know what the impact of that would be. And I started hearing it from my oldest. Her dream was to live in an RV and park it either in the Walmart parking lot because there's a bathroom, or live in an RV and park it in our driveway because she can use all our stuff, both of which we'd put the kibosh on. But she said, Daddy, I think I've given up on the dream of the RV. I was like, I thought we were done with that, whatever. She said, I think I want to get a house or an apartment that has 2 rooms. And I was like, okay, you're going to get a roommate? She said, no. She's like, I've watched what's happened with Mr. Chris, and I want to make sure that I always have a space for somebody that needs it. And then I get home, and Roxy, I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm making ornaments. And I was like, you are? She's like, I'm making them for the whole family. I was like, what's that one? She said, I'm making one for Mr. Chris because I don't know if he's going to have a tree, and I want to make sure he has an ornament for his tree, and because we're taking care of him. And I'm realizing that the example that we're setting, even in sometimes being inconvenienced, is that good enough is not good enough. Because there's somebody in your life that needs you to be excellent. And you're missing out on the miraculous, that you didn't even know the ripple effect because you've settled for status quo. You're better. God made you better. God made you for more. And my prayer is that you'd choose more than simply enough. Choose to honor him in excellence. Would you pray with me? Thanks for tuning in to the Forefront Church video podcast. Our hope and prayer is that this has left you encouraged and challenged you in your faith. And you might have some questions and some ways that you want to figure this out, and we want to help with that. Head over to forefrontchurch.info, and there's a couple different ways that you can connect. Click the Connect tab and let us know how we can be praying for you, or a staff member can be contacting you this week. Maybe you have just been encouraged by this and want to support the ministry here at Forefront Church. You can click the Giving tab, as well as other tabs that are in there to help you along in your journey with God. And so we're thankful for you. Thanks for tuning in, and we cannot wait to see you again here online on the video podcast. We love you, and we'll see you then.